Hi everyone, this is Byron Jacobs from D&B Poker, and today in the series of interviews with our authors that I've been doing, I'm very happy to welcome Duncan Palamourdas, who I'm going to be chatting with. Hi Duncan.
Hello Byron, how's it going?
Hi, yeah, good, thank you. How are you?
Excellent, I can't complain.
Good, very pleased to hear it. Now Duncan, when did we publish this book? In 2020. The pandemic gets very confusing. I never remember when anything came out. We published this book that Duncan wrote, Why Alex Beats Bobbie at Poker, back in 2020. And Duncan's here today mainly to talk about the book. But before we get onto this book, obviously you're perhaps, I hope you won't take this the wrong way, you're perhaps not as well known as some of the other people who've written for us. Sure. Give us a little bit of your background and how you came to poker and how you became to be interested, especially in the theoretical side of poker.
No, absolutely. I'm a little bit in a weird position because usually you don't have many poker players who have a very deep mathematical background, and then you don't have many mathematicians who have a very deep poker background. So I happen to be one of those very few people who kind of merge these two worlds. That's why, I'm not that well known necessarily in the poker community or in the mathematical community, but those who are very interested in poker strategy, typically, they will know who I am. But basically, my story is very typical, as many other people. I was in college when I started playing poker, and it happened as a little innocent way for me to beat my friends. We're playing for nickels and dimes, and I soon realized there is so much more depth to the game than I initially had anticipated. So one thing led to another, and I realized that poker is not just about like the movies were telling us, like staring your opponent, just knowing deep their soul, what they actually have, or you have to bet your unborn son at the table, when somebody goes all in or stuff like that. None of that. But I did realize that there's a lot of decision making at the poker table that takes out the guessing aspect of it. Like a lot of people are making it sound like poker is something, it's all about guessing. You have no idea. It's like it's a 50-50. Do they have it? Do they not? But it turns out that in the grand scheme of things, and actually this meshes really well with what is known in mathematics as probability theory. The way people are doing probability theory, they have all these like weird, scary graphs. Sometimes they call them bell curves and things like that. What a bell curve is basically telling you is that how likely you can be at the top portion of the curve or like the middle portion of the curve, and that's the same with poker. Something which is very likely is usually what we call like in the middle portion of the curve, which is taller and thicker, and there's more stuff in there. So I saw those parallels, and I realized that there may be, basically the strategies spoke my language, so to speak. So I decided to dig a little bit deeper, and that's what led me to first play the game, then teach classes, and then write the book. But another thing that I don't know if it's relevant, but one of the things that I realized is that yes, that language, the probabilistic language that I just told you about, like the curves and all of this jargon spoke to me, but it may not necessarily speak to other people. So my challenge was, is there any way we can create metaphors? Is there a way we can create a very go big or go home, like a little mantras, little simple ideas? Or recently, I wrote an article which I talk about the idea that can we summarize winning poker in one sentence? And it was a daunting task, but I think I did it. I don't know if you care to to hear what my sentence is.
Is it quite a long sentence?
It is actually not really a long sentence, but it has a lot of deeper meaning, and it's kind of like peeling an onion. And it was like, if I could summarize in one sentence, is are we in control of the hand? That would be, and of course people will ask, will get intrigued. What do you mean by in control? But then I will make a case that betting is about controlling the hand. Folding in situations where you don't think you have the best hand, it's about controlling the hand. Being able to not attach yourself to specific hand holdings is about being control of the hand. Not being able to tilt is about control of the hand. So I just feel that, like the underlying concept is about being control of the hand, which,
Okay, that's very interesting. Now, I remember you'd pretty much written, I think, the entire book when you contacted us.
That's
which
correct.
is a little bit unusual because normally people contact us and they have an idea for a book and they might have written a bit and they've got a few, but this kind of like turned up more or less fully formed, I think. And what I really liked about the book when I first saw it was that it wasn't, we get a lot of stuff, which is fine, where people are saying, okay, you have to play these hands pre-flop and you do this on the flop. And if you've got this kind of drawing hand, you do this kind of strategy. So it's very sort of didactic for specific situations. But what the sense that I got with this book was that you were trying to create a kind of overall theoretical framework for the game of poker, rather than worrying over much about specific individual decisions, so that people could, by reading this book, they could learn this kind of poker framework, and this could then inform their decisions at the table, without, obviously they still have to know which hands to play in which positions, but this kind of gives them a kind of bedrock that they can build from. Is that a fair summary of what you were trying to do?
Oh, that's a perfect explanation. Absolutely. And not just that, I would just say that incidentally, and wife helped me with that. I mean, there is still the stuff that you mentioned, you know, which hands to play and all of that stuff. I mean, I think it's, I believe it's chapter 5 or 6, Alex's entire strategy. So there is that there too. But you nailed it in the head. Basically, my idea was when somebody presents something to me, personally, right, the way I like to learn about things, I don't like people to tell me what to do, because like when somebody tells me what to do, and again, this is how I think, right? When somebody comes to me and they tell me what to do, it makes the silent assumption that they know me, they know who I am. So I don't want to make that assumption for the reader. I don't want to make the presumption that I know who they are, where they're coming from, what their strengths and their weaknesses are. So it would be much simpler for me, and hopefully for the reader, to make no assumptions whatsoever, and then give them the food for thought, which is of course not just like some random food for thought. Like, I mean, what makes people, you know, winning players, what makes people losing players, and then they can create a strategy which suits their own personalities and their own you know, beings, so that it can work for them. Because I'm also, part of my concern is that if I tell people, you know, just to, you know, follow steps 1, 2, 3, sure, they may be doing it for as long as they're reading the book, but after a while, if it's not them, it's not going to stick. So my point is not just, you know, try to sound, you know, smart or anything. The point is, like, you know, if there is something that can affect people, it should be more personalized. So, and I make a case of that in the book, that this is not war stories. The book is not about me, and it's not about what, you know, people should do. It's neither of that, because I usually feel that there's 2 types of books. There's either the books where people writing about themselves, you know, I mean, Gus Hansen's book from back in the day, you know, Every Hand Revealed, or, you know, obviously, I mean, there's some amazing books from DB, like, you know, Poker Brad, or, you know, Greg Raymer's book. I mean, and these are great players, and people want to know what went through their heads, right? I mean, and these books are absolutely essential. And then there's books, you know, like with more general strategy, you know, more GTO stuff. I mean, there's some also great books in DB you guys have there, you know, about, like, you know, more general strategies as well, and both in No Limit and PLO, right? So, and again, the issue about these strategies, although again they're very necessary and a lot of people are interested in that, is that they are very they can be rigid and not tailored to, you know, the weaknesses and the strengths of the individual. So that's basically the type of audience that I'm trying to reach. You know, the people who want to think for themselves, and they just want to ask themselves, what are the right questions for me to ask? Yeah. Because that's not clear. Asking the right question is not an easy thing, and, you know, it took me a long time to you know, to ask you know, to find what I would consider to be, again, it's subjective in that sense, but what I would consider to be the right questions to ask.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, because one of my experiences as a player is that I think it's very hard in the heat of the moment to ask yourself the right question about a decision that you have to take, because, you know, you get all wrapped up in the emotions. Oh God, he's hit his hand again. He's always raising me. He can't have it. No, you have to stop and think about what is this person's range, perhaps, you know, what how often are they playing like this? What are the, you know, you need to ask the right questions before you can form a decision. And the other thing that I really liked about the approach that you took was that this book, it's essentially all about No Limit Hold'em, but the principles that you're discussing, I think if a player wants to transition to PLO, or even try mixed games plus try a stud game or a low ball game or something, if you have if you have this kind of poker framework where you know how to ask yourself the right questions, it's going to be, I think, much easier to make a transition into a different style of game rather than trying to learn it like a foreign language from scratch, something like that. So I think that's where this book can really score as well. And also, I think for people new to poker who maybe play another game, like they might have been a chess player or something like that, and they want to try poker, something like this, I think, can really give them, like I've said before, like this theoretical framework. So they kind of know what they're trying to do and maybe how to achieve it.
No, absolutely. I would hope so. And part of the reason is that, again, I don't view poker as an independent subject that fell out of the sky, right? I do see incredible connections between, again, some people would call it game theory, between poker, between everyday life, between risk taking. So for that reason, it kind of like, applies to other games as well. And you can even say it applies to other aspects of life, how to think about, in situations, competitive situations. What I mentioned earlier, am I in control of the hand? This is a situation, am I in control in this negotiation process, for example, right? I mean, it can apply to a negotiation that happens on a day-to-day basis. I have to be careful with that. I don't want to necessarily call the book about philosophy, but I definitely think that there is a philosophical connections between the game itself and aspects of life. And I'm very interested in those connections. And again, by looking strictly at the strategy aspect of it, we may lose those connections and get too lost in the weeds, so to speak. Like you said earlier, I mean, we're thinking at the table in the heat of the moment. It's very difficult to make decisions. So if we're thinking to ourselves, again, we can ask questions like you said, what my opponent's range are and things like that. But I would even take it one step further and ask very, very, very simple questions. Like, for example, am I in position? Do I have card advantage? And do I have the initiative? And if like this very short checklist, which is almost like ticking boxes, if the answer is no, we should better come with a very, very strong argument, other than just I feel like playing the hand, either to overcome the situations. And what I found, again, empirically, is that when you have those like little mental checklists in your head, you can actually get away with situations where otherwise your emotions would take over and you could make mistakes. You could say, listen, I mean, I never played that hand in that spot ever, so I'm not going to just start now. It's just kind of like an instinctive reaction to things. So
okay, now obviously your specialist subject is mathematics. Yeah, that's what you teach as your. Would you say it's your main job? Your main day job is you're teaching mathematics. So now, obviously, there is
and poker classes actually. So this is I do poker classes too. That's my kind of specializations, right? Yeah.
Okay. Now, obviously, there's obviously an element of mathematics in poker, so that must play to your strength to a certain degree. What would you say to players who just kind of don't get numbers at all? Some people just are kind of like, it's like a language that they can't learn, mathematics. And if they get the impression that they need to be very strong at mathematics to be good at poker, they maybe be put off the game or think that they can never really excel at it. So what would you say to someone like that who is fearful that their kind of lack of mathematical expertise is going to hold them back?
No, absolutely. So there's two things. When we say the word mathematics, on the one hand, there's what you would call the language of mathematics, right? I mean, that's probably the easiest thing to describe, like those weird pesky symbols that it takes us, like an hour to read a simple sentence, right? I mean, all these symbols, what do they mean? That's the language of mathematics. That's basically symbols. And then there is the ideas that they represent, right? So now, when we say, do people they have hard, like 9 times out of 10, when somebody says I have an issue with mathematics, right? What they really mean, I have an issue with the symbols. I have an issue with the representation. I was bad at math at school. What that usually means is that I had issue with like all of these terminologies and all of these symbols. And I would argue that a lot of those things that mathematics represent are things that people are thinking about it. They just think about them in a different context, right? When we say things like too expensive or too cheap, isn't that a mathematical concept?
Yeah.
right? Like in a certain sense, actually, there is a formula for too expensive and for too cheap. But who needs the formula when they already understand what the formula represents? So my goal has always been try to represent those formulas without the formulas. And I've always said to people, like, people are always telling me, like, I have trouble with pot odds and I have trouble with now, specific things. And I'm saying, it doesn't really matter as long as you understand what goes behind them, as long as you understand ideas like a hand is expensive or a hand is cheap, without necessarily having to go down to the 3 decimal places. You can still get the feel for it and the idea. And also, I try to shy away from again, hardcore symbolology. There is some math equations towards the end of the book, the absolute end of the book, for those who just want to take a look at how the numbers would look like. But the majority of the book, for the majority of the book, doesn't touch numbers. It touches all the ideas behind them, because again, it is very important to understand the mathematical ideas before we can communicate them, for a writer, that is. But for the reader doesn't necessarily need to understand the symbols if they can understand the underlying concepts. And again, one of the perfect examples of that, there's many people who are considered to be amazing in the game, and they're not number people. Phil Ivey would be a great example. Phil Hellmuth, the great fields of the game. I mean, they're all people who, they're field players, as they call them. Like, they play a lot by feel, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a sense, of expensive and cheap, which comes really at the core of the type of math needed for that game.
It's interesting what you say about symbols. This is a slight digression, but there's an experiment that I really like. Is I've no doubt you've heard of this. You give a person 4 cards, and you say there's a rule. If it's red, they're either red or green on one side, and they're either odd or even with a number on the other side. And you say the rule is that if it's red on one side, it has to be even on the other side. And there's 4 cards, and there's one red, one green, one with an even number 6 and an odd number 9. And you say, which 2 do you have to turn over to verify the rule? And this is really difficult. Even people who are good at maths find this really difficult. If you change the structure and you say, okay, here we've got there's drinks. One side has drinks and the other side has ages. So you've got the age is either 16 or 22, and it's either a Coke or a beer. Now, which one do you have to? And suddenly, people don't have to think about it. They know immediately. Oh, I need to know what the young guy's drinking, and I need to know who's drinking the beer. It's kind of really obvious. Whereas when it's couched in mathematical terms, it's so difficult.
Exactly. And what's difficult there is the connection with our brains, because we're not wired to understand integral signs and derivatives and pluses. And I know pluses and minuses are so integrated in our daily life, but I mean, we're not, like what you said, even and odd, we're not integrated to think even and odd. Well, what is this? Like, where do we see evenness and oddness in everyday life? I mean, what we see when we understand, we see 2 eyes, 1 nose. These are the things. That's what even for us, the 2 eyes, or 1 nose, or 2 ears. That's how we see evenness and oddness in our everyday life. And you're spot on. That's a perfect example. That is a perfect example where people understand the mathematical concept behind it, and they're stuck with the terminology, and they're stuck with the symbolology. They're stuck with the interpretation, with the communication aspect of it, which is just the symbols.
Sure. Now, one thing I'm curious about is, obviously you have this tremendous feel for numbers. Is there something that you've come across in your learning process of poker where you've been really surprised by, the result, the method? I mean, for example, one thing that very early in my poker learning, I never used to consider backdoor possibilities, like running clubs for a flush or running cards for a strike. So I thought, this is just so implausible. It's not whether actually these are really important, and they do add substantial percentages. And when you factor those percentages in, they make a big difference between hands that you can play and hands you can't play. And that came as a real surprise. Have you encountered anything like that?
Absolutely.
That doesn't feel intuitive.
Absolutely. Two examples immediately come to mind, and I had to really think them through, and I still think them to this day in order to make sense of them. The first one is the idea of limping. For anybody who doesn't know what limping is, just calling the big blind as opposed to raising. So what I came to realize after a lot of experience playing the game, I came to realize that somehow raising was better than just limping in a vacuum in general. So if you want to play a hand, typically it's much better to raise than just call the big blind. I mean, and I was asking myself, I mean, I see it in practice, but why it really is, right? And I mean, we can go into all the numbers and we can go, I mean, I make like a huge case in the book, you know, I'm talking about like aggression and the power of aggression and having initiative and all of that stuff. But I mean, if I were to summarize it with one picture, and that was the picture that actually clicked it for me, it was the equivalent of thinking about junk food versus healthy food. And I was basically, think of it this way. Price-wise, typically junk food is cheaper than healthy food, right? Typically. But now the question is junk food really meta cheaper? In other words, in the long run, is it really cheaper, or is there adverse reactions to it, like health issues, fat gain, or like obesity and things like that, heart issues and things like that that can come with junk food that actually make it more costly than healthy food in the long run? So and I thought it was actually raising before the flop is cheaper in the long run. I realized that was the thing that clicked it for me, right? Because it's like, how is it possible that something that's cheaper is actually worse, namely limping? It's cheaper in face value, but long term, because now people, you induce fear on opponents, for lack of a better term. Some people call that fear equity. But all jokes aside, by raising, we gain control of the hand. Alex, by raising, she's getting control of the hand, which means now she generates more checks. And by getting more checks, that means she controls the size of the pot, which means less money goes in the pot unless she wants to put more money in. So like, it becomes cheaper in the long run. So that was one of these ideas that really, for me, I was very surprised. How is it something that's cheaper, namely limping, be worse than something more expensive? And it turns out it's not cheaper, not in the long run anyway. So that was the one thing. The other thing that really and I see that all the time, and even some of the game's greatest, I feel they still, myself included, we still don't feel it to our bones. And that's the idea that the example I give is usually aces versus kings, right? So, and I ask people, okay, if you have aces and your opponent has kings, let's say you play a tournament, major tournament, and somehow, you both have monster hands, raise, re-raise, all the money goes in. Who deserves to win, right? You have aces, your opponent has kings, who deserves to win? And overwhelmingly, everybody says, I deserve to win, I have aces. But wait a minute. Do you have 100% chance of winning though? You say you deserve to win, right? We like to see things in black and white in life, right? I deserve to win, they deserve to lose. But poker doesn't live in that black and white, right? Poker tells us, and again, if we want to put a little bit of numbers, poker tells us that about, 80% of the time, or, 4-1, aces are going to win. What's that one over there, right? What's that one over there? That one over there is telling us that you don't exactly deserve to win. Maybe your head and your shoulders and your legs deserve to win, but your arms and I know that's a silly metaphor, but my point is not 100% of you deserve to win. So there's your arms that don't deserve to win. And actually, to all jokes aside, what I realized is that every time we win the full pot, we get lucky. Our arms got lucky. Our arms didn't deserve to win. So if we win, our arms got lucky, which means every time we lose with aces versus king, we got to give all the unfair winnings back to the person, that we, and of course, that's how the long run works. There's no fairness or anything like that, but hopefully you get the picture, right? So that clicked it for me, that if we win with aces versus kings as an overwhelming favorite, we got lucky. No, not we got lucky that we didn't get unlucky. We got lucky because we didn't deserve everything. Our arms didn't deserve the pot, and our arms also got it with the rest of our body. It's a silly metaphor. I like silly metaphors. That's, so they draw a big picture. They come the point across. They help you to come the point across. But that was a surprising fact for me. The fact that, aces, they shouldn't win there. They should win there 80%, which means there's still that 20% that needs to be accounted for.
But another way you can look at that is to say, okay, probably neither player has done anything wrong in that scenario, because the player with kings almost certainly didn't make a mistake. So like neither player has necessarily played well or badly, because I always think of playing well is when you can grab a piece of EV that doesn't belong to you. You can steal that EV expected value from the opponent. Then you're outplaying the opponent. And obviously the reverse is also the case. I suppose if you've got aces and kings and it all goes in, no one is taking anyone's EV. It's just in the lap of the gods who gets the money in that scenario.
Correct, but you can also take it one step further and ask yourself, like it's more like a psychological or mental aspect. Is variance, like a bad thing or an unfair thing? But if you think about it, I mean, variance is what makes the game go, and those people who have the opportunity, to and I think, because again, a lot, like when I realized that, the fact that even as a favorite, we do not deserve to win the full pot, that actually lowered my expectations a lot, by what we can do, what win rates can do, and things like that. And I think that's where the expectation come to more realistic levels, perhaps. And that's what I was referring to. But you're 100% correct. I mean, once you do what you would consider to be the right decision, there's absolutely nothing else you can do. But yeah, but that's why, also losing sessions are going to be inevitable.
Okay, and also as a maths guy, obviously the big thing in the last 4 or 5 years of poker is the advent of GTO and solvers, and how players can now analyze using solvers to tease out the GTO principles of various different scenarios. What would you like to say about that? Do you think GTO is something that people really have to study and know, or can they get by more with a kind of general framework that allows them to understand what they should be doing and not necessarily worry too much about what the solver's telling them, and be more focused on the game that they're playing with their opponents, in the actual circumstances they find themselves in?
Absolutely. No, this is an excellent question, and one that I actually get a lot, because people are looking for people with a mathematical background and ask about GTO. I actually recently posted something on Twitter about that. Again, I'm trying to summarize it in one sentence if I can. That's why I like Twitter. It challenges me a lot. And basically the way I think about GTO is like martial arts. It's one of those things where they're valuable in many respects, but you hope you never have to use them in real life because that's going to be too late. The other thing I'm going to say, just as an introduction, and then we can go into a little bit more nuance. One more thing that I'm going to say: there is a type of people who avoid GTO because they don't understand it, and there is a very teeny tiny fraction of people who avoid GTO because they understand it very well. And I want to make the distinction because obviously people who don't understand what GTO is and they don't they avoid it. That's understandable. But the reason why there's this second category, and I happen to fall into the second category because, again, I've studied the stuff and I've actually taught game theory, optimal strategies outside of poker, and studied and taught them at the university. But what makes GTO unappealing, once you understand exactly what it really says, is the fact that GTO, like the word optimal, like we have to just a little bit of a definition. The word optimal doesn't mean most profitable. The word optimal, and the example I usually give is rock, paper, scissors. That's the easiest example, right? Let's say we are in Vegas. I don't make that stuff up, by the way. There used to be a World Series of rock, paper, scissors. Yeah. You're familiar? Yes. So,
it's a very skillful game.
Absolutely. So there's some mind games. So there's two ways we can play the strategy. One strategy is we can try to get into our opponent's head, try to guess what they're going to do and counter that, right? And hopefully we have an edge. And the classic example is, they call it rookie's rock. Most people, especially guys, they've done some studies, they tend to start with rock. That's something that, most people do. So if you didn't know that, you got a new tip. So if you are at a random bar, you try rock, paper, scissors against the guy, assume they're going to go with rock and you can go with paper. So if we go and try to counter that strategy, we can go with paper. Now, of course, if our opponent is thinking, oh, he knows that I'm going to start with rock, he's going to start with paper, I'm going to start with scissors, and they can try to counter that. So before you know it, I know, she knows, I know, it goes completely crazy. So to avoid all of that, we can GTO, namely we can randomize our strategy. And what that does, it actually prevents us from being exploited. That doesn't necessarily give us the maximum possible money available for us to win. What GTO does, and this is a very subtle thing, it tells, you know, this is the pie, you're gonna win half of it, and that's it. But you're never gonna get less than that. So it kind of like, it's a way to secure, it's kind of like a way to hedge, it's a way to secure a certain outcome and not go higher or lower. So you kind of like, you grab your outcome. And of course, if your opponent starts with some mistakes, then maybe the outcome that you secure is already a profit. So I'm not saying that you cannot profit through GTO, but GTO is not about optimizing profits. GTO is about securing a certain percentage. You lock in your profits, you're not gonna go higher, you're not gonna go lower, no matter what your opponent does. The issue with that is that in the overwhelming, and I mean that, in the overwhelming games out there, that means leaving money on the table, left and right. Because at the risk of a hypothetical exploitation from the opponent that in actuality may never happen, right? At the risk of, you know, being exploited by an opponent who doesn't know how to exploit us, we turtle up and we potentially leave out profits that we could have if we left a little bit, if we exposed a little bit of our left side, even though we know that our opponent would never use that to jab at our left side, which is now unprotected.
Yeah.
So that is so what GTO does, it protects you fully, but at the cost of not potentially like winning all the money you could have. So, you know, again, at the cost of like potentially exposing part of ourselves that we think it's highly unlikely the opponent will take advantage of, there's more money at the table. And that is the thing, you know, that I want to make sure that's one thing. At a little bit more nuance, people need to also understand that solvers are not actually solving the game, right? Is what I would call conditionally optional or optimal. What that means is they make assumptions and they start on those assumptions and they solve the game based on those assumptions. So if those assumptions are being met, the game that they're solving is not the actual game that happens there. So there is a huge nuance on the subject, but you know, even if we don't go there, I mean, there's still certain things that solvers are very helpful with, like specific scenarios that come over and over, then that everybody knows how to play, so to speak. So in that case, I mean, we can say, you know what, I'm going to lock in my profits for that specific scenario. So there's definitely, I'm not saying that the solvers are useless, but it does require kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect. It does require the idea that the more you know, the more you realize that you don't know. It does require a certain amount of know-how, what they're good for and what they're bad for, before we jump, you know, head in to those. Because again, they're getting too much of a hype. It's like one of my friend, you know, joked. I mean, people are paying like really good money to go and play in bad games, because essentially you use GTO in games that you don't want to be in. or as I have to joke, like, Duncan, what is your best counter strategy against GTO? I change the table. That's, you know, they ask me, like, do you use GTO at the tables? I mean, it's better to honestly change the table. That's my kind of like honest opinion on the subject. But I mean, I can talk for hours. This is a subject I'm interested in.
Okay. All right. So to return to the book, this is the book we've been discussing a lot today, and Duncan's obviously his theoretical and philosophical take on poker. This is Why Alex Beats Bobbie at Poker. I really like this book. I liked it the first time when the script first turned up, and I'm really happy with the book that we published. Just maybe, Duncan, just in a couple of paragraphs, just a couple of, you know, short, to sum up what people are going to gain from getting hold of this book. How will this improve their poker? What will they learn from this that they specific to this book that they might not get from other books that they've read or are thinking of reading?
Right, sure. So the short version is, and it can be very, very short, that at some point I realized that money flows from losing players to winning players, right? And this is what the archetypes Alex and Bobbie in the book are. So Bobbie is, I wouldn't necessarily call him a losing player, because he is a losing player, but I mean, he's also somebody who understands that he's going to lose, right? He's the gambler. So Bobbie is the gambler and Alex is the professional. So Bobbie sacrifices profitability in order to have fun, and Alex sacrifices some of that fun in order to have profitability. Some would argue that profitability is itself fun, but you know, but the idea is that we can't have them both. But the fact of the matter remains that money flows from from fun to profitability, right? Money flows from people like Bobby, who want to gamble, want to have fun, to people like Alex, who's professional. So the question is, why does money flow, right? Again, what are the questions that we need to ask? Why does that happen? And that's what the book explores. So basically what happened, and how somebody who's interested perhaps in having, profitability over the gambling aspect, they can actually see how potentially they can create a strategy of their own. And then also, they can also look at Alex's strategy, which is in the book, to get an idea. It's not like, I want them to have like a wild imagination or anything like that. But that's the idea. So why money flows from amateurs to professionals, and how can one create a strategy to take advantage of that?
Okay. Thank you very much, Duncan. So, just final time, this is the book we've been talking about, Why Alex Beats Bobbie at Poker. You can get this from all the usual outlets that you get your books from. If you want to buy it from us, from our site, we'd be delighted to sell you one. And also the ebook is available from our site. So thank you very much, Duncan. It's been a fascinating discussion to pick your mind a bit about poker and mathematics and how it all interacts. So thank you very much for joining us. And wish you luck with your coaching and teaching, and please bring a lot more people into the game of poker.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. It's been a lot of fun, Byron. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Duncan.